I still remember the exact moment my mother looked at me across the marble-top kitchen island and said words that would change the course of my life forever. The late afternoon sun filtered through the bay windows, casting a golden haze over her perfectly arranged silver china set. She sat there, tall, poised in a pale silk blouse, while I, in my worn leather jacket and threadbare jeans, fidgeted with the frayed hem of my shirt. My heart pounded, each beat echoing the dread I felt when her words sliced through the air. "Amara, you're not worthy of my money." That sentence felt like betrayal incarnate. Worthy of her money. Not her affection or her time or her pride, but her money. Everything I'd hoped for in my relationship with her crystallized into that one phrase. I was less than, unworthy, insignificant in her eyes, unless I carried the heft of her wealth on my shoulders. I'm Amara Kensington, and this is how I began my crusade. I grew up in her shadow. My mother, Celeste Kensington, a titan of real estate whose name alone could open vaults at elite banks. She built empires out of brownstones and high-rises, and her empire included me, sort of. She provided my schooling at the finest private academies in Boston and later at a top-tier university in London, but love and acceptance were only extended when I performed, when I lived up to the monumental standards she set. That afternoon, I had returned from a business meeting, an independent venture I'd launched 2 years after graduation. My startup specialized in financial literacy for underserved communities, a venture I believed would make her proud. But instead of praise, I walked into condemnation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was empowering others to manage their money wisely while she lectured me about my lack of qualifications to inherit any piece of her fortune. I thought back to all the times I witnessed the shaming tactics. Friends of mine obtaining her mercy only after they secured 6-figure internships. Cousins who squeaked by with unwanted tuition contributions. Even my younger brother Hugo, whose every mistake was overlooked because his achievements gleamed brighter in her ledger. And me? I was the black sheep, the underperformer in her profit and loss statement of family assets. I left that kitchen in a storm of emotions. Anger roiled in my chest. Hush of betrayal whispered in my ears. But under it all, something flickered. A determination, kindled by humiliation, that I would prove my worth, not by her arbitrary yardsticks, but on my own terms. I would use the very tool that she had wielded against me, her money. That night, I opened the secure folder on my laptop that held 2 years' worth of research. Property tax records, amortization tables, equity valuations. For months, I had been quietly gathering data on the Kensington family's real estate portfolio. Acreage she owned in upstate New York, duplexes in Seattle, and, most importantly, the stately colonial house she had bought 20 years ago on Beacon Hill. Beacon Hill wasn't just any property, it was the symbol of her success and the cornerstone of her identity. It was where I'd opened my first lemonade stand as a curious 5-year-old, where I practiced piano recitals, and where I sobbed the tears of teenage heartbreak. And yet, it was little more than a line item on her balance sheet. By midnight, I had laid out a plan. If she thought I wasn't worthy, I would demonstrate my power by paying off the mortgage on her Beacon Hill house completely. I would transfer the remaining principal, nearly $3.2 million, onto my own loan, extinguish her debt, and then rent the property back to her at market rate. Let her rent checks come through me. Let her reflect on how much I had given, with one hand, only to take back with the other. The legal documents would be ready in 3 months, a shell corporation, several layers of LLCs, and a trustee to manage the transfers. I would use my credit line, secured by my business assets, and a silent investor who believed in my mission. Family accountability. My friend Jonas, a whiz in corporate law, had agreed to draft the paperwork under strict confidentiality. But I wasn't naive. I knew this would ignite a war. Celeste Kensington would not go quietly into a tenant's role in her own home. She would scramble her board of directors, summon high-profile lawyers, and wage a PR campaign painting me as the ungrateful daughter. Yet I had run the numbers. My venture's recent Series B funding had infused enough capital to service the interest. I could bear the scrutiny, navigate the storm, and emerge with my dignity intact. Over the next weeks, as winter's first snow glazed the cobblestones of Beacon Hill, I moved in stealth mode. I set up midnight calls with bankers in New York, traced the title deed through archaic county courthouses, and wired discreet deposits to the escrow account. Each step tightened the net around my plan, an act of familial coup meant to shake her confidence to its core. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a cryptic message: "Stop now or everything falls." It came from an unknown number through an encrypted channel. My pulse raced. Was it her? Her syndicate of family attorneys? Or someone else who wanted to see the Kensington legacy preserved at all costs? I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Jonas: "We're live." That night, I sat alone in my loft, the panorama of the city lights shimmering through floor-to-ceiling windows. I clicked submit on the final loan draw, authorizing the full payoff. As I exhaled, a mix of exhilaration and dread coursed through me. Tomorrow, I would face my mother as the creditor of her own property. Tomorrow, I would become the landlord in my childhood home. And tomorrow, our confrontation would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The next morning arrived cold and brittle, like a pane of frosted glass poised to shatter under pressure. I dressed deliberately, selecting a navy wool coat that hit just below the knee, tailored black trousers, and ankle boots polished to a gleam. I pulled my hair into a tight bun, no longer the wind-blown mess my mother liked to critique. There would be no distractions today, only confrontation. I didn't call ahead. She hated unannounced visits, and that was precisely why I walked up the steps of her Beacon Hill home without warning. The red brick still carried the faint imprint of snow, and the ironwork gate with its ornate swirls and lion head knocker hadn't changed since I was 12. I gripped the knocker once, twice, and waited. It opened on the third knock. Celeste Kensington answered the door herself, her lips painted in a muted wine tone and her pearls clasped tight at her throat. For a moment, her face froze, only a flicker of confusion before the practiced grace set in. "Amara, to what do I owe this surprise?" she asked, stepping aside but not quite inviting me in. "I'm here about the house," I said, stepping over the threshold. The warmth hit me first, followed by the scent of polished wood, bergamot, and her usual vanilla bean candles. We stood in the foyer, where a gold-framed mirror loomed over us like a silent judge. "What about it?" she asked, voice flat. "I paid off the mortgage. As of this morning, it's mine." For a long, silent second, her face didn't register the words. Then her eyes narrowed, scanning mine as if searching for the punchline. "You? What?" I pulled out the manila envelope from my coat. Inside were certified copies of the wire transfer confirmation, title deed reassignment, and the contract noting my name, not hers, under the ownership clause. Jonas's signature adorned the bottom. Her hand trembled only slightly as she flipped through the documents. "You bought this house out from under me?" she whispered, more insulted than astonished. "No," I said calmly. "I bought your debt, which included the house. It's been paid off in full. You're now a tenant." The color drained from her face. Her spine went rigid. I half expected her to throw the papers, but Celeste Kensington never reacted like a soap opera villain. She internalized, weaponized, composed. "This is retribution," she said quietly, placing the papers back in the envelope like they were contaminated. "No," I replied, meeting her gaze. "This is reality. I used what you told me, that I'm not worthy of your money, and turned it into a business decision. Welcome to capitalism." "You've made a mistake," she hissed. "This is war, Amara." "I know," I said, "which is why I've prepared." Before she could slam the door, I turned and walked away, the echo of my boots striking the floor like a judge's gavel. The backlash didn't take long. Within 48 hours, I was receiving cease and desist letters from her attorney. 3 more followed from business affiliates, and one particularly aggressive letter threatened to challenge the legitimacy of the wire transfer under grounds of, quote, "familial manipulation." I'd expected this. Jonas had too. We were airtight. But the personal fallout was more vicious. My younger brother Hugo called, voice laden with disbelief and accusation. "You humiliated her," he spat. You think this makes you powerful? No, Hugo, I said, pacing my office. I think this makes me free. She's our mother. She's your mother, I corrected. Mine doesn't recognize me unless I'm profitable. The call ended with a door slam and a long silence on both ends of the line, but I didn't waver. I stayed the course. I knew I had to escalate, to make the terms of her tenancy public. Within a week, I filed a legally binding rental agreement that listed Celeste Kensington as a tenant of the Beacon Hill property. The document was transparent, fair, and, crucially, absent of any preferential treatment. Rent was set at market rate, $21,500 per month. Due by the 5th of each month, 3-day grace period. After that, penalties would apply. The press found the filing and tore into it like sharks in bloodied water. I didn't grant interviews, but the headlines wrote themselves. Real estate heiress becomes tenant in her own home. Daughter's corporate takeover makes waves. Kensington family implodes. Power shift in Beacon Hill. Celeste, of course, responded with a campaign of her own. She made appearances on financial news programs, positioning the ordeal as a, quote, tragic family misunderstanding, branding herself the victim of generational ego. I watched her blink slowly into cameras, her voice trembling as she said things like, I've always supported Amara in everything she's done. Lies. Meanwhile, the first rent payment never arrived. I sent a warning notice through Jonas's firm. Silence. By the 10th day, we followed up with a notice to pay or quit, a legal nudge with sharp teeth. The media turned rabid. She accused me of exploiting her. The headlines flipped. Term daughter evicts own mother, social media split. But the court of public opinion didn't matter to me. What mattered was that I had offered her a contract, and she ignored it. If I were any other landlord, this wouldn't even be a story. But because it was Sunny, the world watched with popcorn in hand. I didn't want to evict her, not really, but I would. It was at the court hearing, where everything came to a head. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. I sat next to Jonas, his tie impeccable, his laptop open and ready. Celeste arrived in a gray cashmere pantsuit, flanked by 2 high-profile attorneys, both older white men with leather-bound briefcases and egos you could smell. The judge was a woman, early 50s, sharp eyes, minimal patience for theatrics. Celeste's legal team argued first, claims of duress, exploitation, psychological manipulation. They leaned on emotional distress and cited my, quote, position of power over her as grounds for annulling the rental agreement. Then Jonas stood. We're not here to psychoanalyze the complexities of a strained mother-daughter relationship, he said, voice calm but firm. We are here to discuss a legal agreement that Ms. Kensington willingly entered into, an agreement she has failed to honor. He presented everything, the deed, the payment logs, the signed lease. The room went quiet as he displayed Celeste's signature, projected onto the courtroom screen. It was hers. And it was dated. I watched her face as her attorneys realized their argument was sinking. The judge called for a recess. During the break, I stepped into the hallway for air. That's when she approached me. You think you've won, Celeste said, her voice sharp and controlled. This isn't about winning, I replied. This is about fairness, something you never offered me. She stepped closer. You think you've climbed the mountain, Amara? But you have no idea how many avalanches I've survived. I stared at her. Then get ready for another one. The judge ruled in my favor. Celeste Kensington was officially a tenant in default. I now had the legal right to evict her. But I didn't. Instead, I sent one final offer, reduced rent for 1 year, under the condition that she publicly retract her statements and contribute $500,000 to a women's financial literacy initiative I had founded under my company. She refused. So the locks were changed. Movers were arranged. Her belongings, carefully cataloged and preserved, were transferred to a storage facility in South Boston. And just like that, the matriarch of Beacon Hill had no keys to her own kingdom. Hugo stopped speaking to me. Her board ousted her 2 months later, citing, quote, prolonged public distraction. I watched from a distance as she stepped away from the empire she built, her face taut in resignation. But not defeat. Never defeat. I knew she was regrouping, recalibrating, she would return, and when she did, she would come at me from another angle. But I was ready. Because the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Lies. Meanwhile, the first rent payment never arrived. I sent a warning notice through Jonas's firm, Silence. By the 10th day, we followed up with a notice to pay or quit, a legal nudge with sharp teeth. The media turned rabid. She accused me of exploiting her. The headlines flipped. Jules Utrecht, daughter evicts own mother, social media split. But the court of public opinion didn't matter to me. What mattered was that I had offered her a contract, and she ignored it. If I were any other landlord, this wouldn't even be a story. But because it was Cortidi, the world watched with popcorn in hand. I didn't want to evict her, not really, but I would. It was at the court hearing where everything came to a head. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. I sat next to Jonas, his tie impeccable, his laptop open and ready. Celeste arrived in a gray cashmere pantsuit, flanked by two high-profile attorneys, both older white men with leather-bound briefcases and egos you could smell. The judge was a woman, early 50s, sharp eyes, minimal patience for theatrics. Celeste's legal team argued first, claims of duress, exploitation, psychological manipulation. They leaned on emotional distress and cited my position of power over her as grounds for annulling the rental agreement. Then Jonas stood. "We're not here to psychoanalyze the complexities of a strained mother-daughter relationship," he said, voice calm but firm. "We are here to discuss a legal agreement that Ms. Kensington willingly entered into. An agreement she has failed to honor." He presented everything: the deed, the payment logs, the signed lease. The room went quiet as he displayed Celeste's signature, projected onto the courtroom screen. It was hers. And it was dated. I watched her face as her attorneys realized their argument was sinking. The judge called for a recess. During the break, I stepped into the hallway for air. That's when she approached me. "You think you've won," Celeste said, her voice sharp and controlled. "This isn't about winning," I replied. "This is about fairness, something you never offered me." She stepped closer. "You think you've climbed the mountain, Amara, but you have no idea how many avalanches I've survived." I stared at her. "Then get ready for another one." The judge ruled in my favor. Celeste Kensington was officially a tenant in default. I now had the legal right to evict her. But I didn't. Instead, I sent one final offer: reduced rent for 1 year, under the condition that she publicly retract her statements and contribute $500,000 to a women's financial literacy initiative I had founded under my company. She refused. So the locks were changed, movers were arranged. Her belongings, carefully cataloged and preserved, were transferred to a storage facility in South Boston. And just like that, the matriarch of Beacon Hill had no keys to her own kingdom. Hugo stopped speaking to me. Her board ousted her 2 months later, citing, quote, "prolonged public distraction." I watched from a distance as she stepped away from the empire she built, her face taut in resignation. But not defeat, never defeat. I knew she was regrouping, recalibrating, she would return, and when she did, she would come at me from another angle. But I was ready. Because the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The cursor blinked at me, steady and patient, as I stared at the folder of files Hugo had handed over. I sat cross-legged in my Beacon Hill study, once my mother's pride and joy sunroom, now a warm cocoon of dark wood shelves, textured throws, and a scent of sandalwood and fresh ink. The air outside had grown heavy with spring rain, the patter against the window somehow amplifying the gravity of what I now held. $3.8 million. Funneled from her new women's foundation into a shell company called Solara Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands, several transfers, all within 6 months. Each marked with vague notations: consulting, strategy, vendor services. Except there were no vendors, no services. She was laundering money. And if I exposed it, she wouldn't just lose credibility, she could lose everything: her new foundation, her properties, possibly even her freedom. I closed the laptop. For a long time I just sat in silence, feeling the pressure gather like a storm cloud above my head, because this was the moment. Not the mortgage, not the eviction, not the gala speech. This was the moment everything tilted into irreversible territory. If I used this, I would be declaring war, not for optics, not for headlines, but real, lasting war, the kind that burns bridges and names and legacies. But if I didn't, what kind of person would that make me? I needed clarity, and there was only one person I could ask. My father. My parents had split when I was 10. My mother had made sure to control the narrative, painting him as soft, idealistic, financially irresponsible. The truth, I learned in my 20s, was far more nuanced. He'd been her equal once, in spirit, if not income. An artist. A painter who'd sold moderately well until Celeste outpaced him in success and outgrew him in ego. He lived now in a quiet cottage in Vermont, remarried to a literature professor, still painting, still somehow soft and unbroken. I hadn't seen him in over a year, but I called. "Come up," he said immediately. "The lilacs just bloomed." So I drove. The air shifted the moment I left the city. The hum of traffic gave way to the hush of pine trees and dirt roads. His cottage sat on a hill overlooking a valley, fog curling like ribbon between the trees. He hugged me longer than necessary, as if sensing something larger was at stake. We sat on his porch, sipping tea, wrapped in old fleece blankets as the sun dipped low. "Dad," I finally said, "if someone you loved did something illegal but exposed themselves as a fraud to thousands of people, would you turn them in?" He didn't flinch. He looked out over the trees for a long time. "Truth has weight, Amara," he said. "Sometimes it liberates, sometimes it crushes. The question isn't whether you expose the truth, it's whether you're ready to carry what comes after." I nodded slowly. What if that truth destroys their life? He turned to me. Then maybe their life was built on sand to begin with. We sat in silence after that. But I knew, deep down I already knew. I returned to Boston the next day. I didn't sleep. I drafted the report myself, outlining the fraudulent transfers, attaching digital evidence, highlighting each bank trail with exhaustive clarity. I wrote a cover letter, professional but urgent, and sent it to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office and the IRS Whistleblower Division. Then I backed everything up in triplicate, one cloud, one encrypted drive, one offline storage. And I waited. The fallout took 4 weeks to begin. It started quietly. An inquiry was opened, subpoenas were issued, staffers at the Kensington Women's Initiative were questioned. Within 10 days, the foundation's assets were frozen. Celeste didn't appear on camera for almost 2 months. When she did, she looked smaller, still polished but quieter. Her voice clipped, controlled. Gone were the sweeping speeches. Instead, she issued a short statement. "Due to a regrettable financial discrepancy, I have chosen to step away from operations while we cooperate fully with investigators. My commitment to empowering women remains steadfast." Translation: she was cornered. I expected the backlash. Former allies texted me, furious, accusing. Betrayed. I lost a few donors. One of our media partners cut ties, fearing the drama was toxic. But the women we served, the founders in our programs, they rallied. They saw through it. They knew. Celeste had built her foundation on image. I'd built mine on proof. Still, she didn't contact me. Not a word, not a call, not even a public jab. Until one Sunday morning I stepped out of a board meeting in Cambridge and found her waiting by my car. She wore black, no jewelry, her hair pulled back like it used to be when I was little. I didn't say a word, just unlocked the door. "I never thought it would be you," she said. "To what?" "To bury me." I stared at her. "I didn't bury you, you did that yourself." She looked at me, long and hard. "You think you've won, Amara, but you've just inherited something far heavier than money. You've inherited the weight of my name. And trust me, it sinks ships." "I never wanted your name," I said, "only the truth." She stepped back. Then I hope it keeps you warm. She walked away. I stood there, watching her disappear down the sidewalk. And I felt nothing. Not triumph, not grief. Just a strange, hollow peace. But the storm wasn't over. Weeks later, as the investigations continued, I began receiving emails from women who had worked for Celeste over the years. Some were interns, some executives, some consultants. Their stories painted a darker picture than I expected. Hostile work environments, NDA-enforced silence, sexual harassment cover-ups, ethical violations, threats. One woman, a former grant writer named Naomi, sent me a full document file. Inside were emails showing that Celeste had used her old real estate firm to muscle out low-income tenants from properties she then flipped under fake names. This wasn't just financial fraud. This was systemic abuse. I had uncovered a rot much deeper than I'd expected. Lumina had already expanded into 3 more cities by then. Our following was strong. Our voice carried weight. So I used it. I called a press conference. This time, I didn't speak from a podium. I sat in a circle of folding chairs, surrounded by 10 of the women who had sent me stories. We called it the Reckoning Table. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't scripted, but it went viral. We told our stories, and I told mine. I never wanted revenge, I said. I wanted truth. And now that I have it, I'm not afraid to share it. Tears, applause, but most of all, solidarity. Within 48 hours, over 300 more women had reached out. Within 2 weeks, the AG's office announced a full audit of Celeste's former real estate firm and her entire nonprofit history. She disappeared from public view. Rumor was she left for Switzerland, no charges, yet. But she was finished, her power dismantled piece by piece. I stood in the doorway of the Beacon Hill house one morning, barefoot, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. A new mural covered the side wall of the garden now, commissioned by Adele and painted by one of our Lumina artists. It depicted women in motion, walking, building, embracing, rising. I ran my fingers along the handrail once so polished and cold. Now it felt warm, lived in. Mine. There would be more battles, more shadows from the past, but I had faced the most powerful force in my life, and I hadn't broken. And as I walked into the home I had once been told I didn't deserve, I realized I had become something far more powerful than my mother ever understood. I had become free. Pons pertol sai papoin tumbostres. Disastrous end of part 4. Let me know when you're ready for part 5. By the time summer unfurled itself across Boston, the house no longer carried her scent. No more sharp bergamot diffusers. No more cool, sterile air conditioning perfectly calibrated to the exact degree she liked. The walls no longer echoed her clipped footsteps, or the soft click of her fingernails against the marble countertop. And yet, even with her gone, disgraced, unmoored, silenced, Celeste Kensington was still a presence in the shadows. The public collapse of the Kensington Women's Initiative hadn't just reverberated through the media. It had detonated through the upper crust of Boston's social elite, like a shockwave. And I, the woman who triggered it, now found myself both praised and whispered about in equal measure. But that didn't matter anymore. I hadn't come this far to win a popularity contest. We were entering the most critical phase of LUMINA's expansion. The Reckoning Table had triggered a nationwide reckoning of its own. We were now inundated with requests from women in Detroit, Dallas, and Sacramento, cities begging for our programs, resources, protection. I wasn't just a founder anymore, I was a beacon. It started with a late-night call. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The woman's voice was hoarse. She didn't give her name. "I don't know if this is safe," she whispered, "but I worked for your mother, a long time ago, back when you were just a kid." I sat up straighter in bed. She used to call us the ballast, the weight that keeps her ship balanced. The woman paused. "There's a ledger," she continued. "From her old real estate office. Not digital. paper. Hidden. I used to manage her private books. The real ones. The ones that never made it to the IRS. My pulse accelerated. "I know where it is," the woman said, "and I'll give it to you, but not over the phone." We met in a parking garage. I wasn't proud of the setting. It felt melodramatic, but it was safe. Cameras at the entrance. Jonas parked nearby. Two of our security staff waited in a nearby vehicle. She stepped out of a rust-colored Prius. Middle-aged, faded lipstick, wearing a Red Sox hoodie. She handed me a manila envelope. "Her sins are heavy," she said. "Make sure you don't drown in them." She disappeared without giving a name. Back at my office, Jonas and I laid out the contents on my desk. A decade's worth of handwritten ledgers, names, payments, codes, properties bought under aliases, evictions, silent buyouts, donations rerouted through tax havens. The ledger was a skeleton key to everything Celeste had ever hidden. We pored through it for days. Some of it corroborated what we already knew, but much of it painted a far more ruthless portrait than even I had imagined. There were signatures of city inspectors, state grant allocations that were quietly redirected, records that showed she'd bought out 2 homeless shelters just to turn them into condos, then buried the story. Jonas looked up at me on the 3rd night. "If this gets out, she won't just be ruined. Half of Boston's elite will be dragged with her." I knew he was right. The ledger implicated judges, developers, public officials, and even 2 local journalists who'd buried damaging stories in exchange for property deals. I stared at the final page. My own name was listed there. Just once. Next to a check dated 6 years ago, $75,000. Labeled, "Schupt 1 of University Performance Incentive." It was the money Celeste had given my college to incentivize them to place me in a prestigious internship. My stomach turned. I'd believed I'd earned that on my own. The truth was, she'd paid for it behind my back. Even my achievements were tainted. I sat back. For the first time in months, I didn't know what to do. I needed grounding. So I returned to the Beacon Hill house, not just to work, but to breathe. Lumina's Boston headquarters had taken up most of the lower floor now. Co-working desks filled the old parlor room. Our program directors worked late, sipping chai and typing up grant proposals at what used to be Celeste's 10-foot dining table. I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. It was mine now, warm and lived in, bookshelves, a deep blue duvet, art by local women, hung in place of the icy landscapes my mother used to adore. I opened the window and let the early summer air spill in. That night I dreamed of water, tidal waves crashing against glass buildings. I stood at the shore with the ledger in hand, and the sea whispered, "Let it go," or "Let it flood." Next morning, I made a decision. We wouldn't publish the entire ledger. Not yet. Instead, we would launch an investigative campaign. One story at a time. We'd cross-reference each case, verify, triple-check, protect the vulnerable. We'd build a team of journalists, lawyers, and survivors to document the truth slowly, precisely. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about record-keeping, about accountability, and above all, about change. I held a team meeting in the garden that week. 17 women sat in a circle. Some in suits, some in hoodies, some cradling babies. "This ledger," I said, "contains the bones of an empire, but it also holds the blueprints for dismantling it." I held it up. "We won't burn this city down, but we will shake its walls, piece by piece, brick by brick." The campaign launched 6 weeks later. We called it "The Truth Was Built Here." Each week, a new case, a new survivor's voice, a new map of corruption. Our first story exposed a developer who'd displaced over 200 families in Roxbury, using Celeste's backdoor funding. The city launched a new task force within 10 days. By story 3, we'd gone national. A former mayor implicated, a city planner resigned. An anonymous whistleblower from Celeste's Cayman Bank contacted us, offering documents. And still, through it all, silence from Celeste. She had vanished entirely. Until I received an invitation, hand-delivered, wax-sealed, no return address. It read, "If you want answers, not blood, meet me, one night, one place, one truth." Attached was a location, an abandoned family estate outside London. My father begged me not to go. Jonas threatened to call the embassy. But I went. It was dusk when I arrived. The manor loomed like something from a Bronte novel: weathered stone, moss-covered gates, ivy strangling the windows. I stepped through the creaking doors alone. She stood in the atrium, older, thinner, wearing a cream turtleneck and black slacks, no jewelry, no staff. "Hello, Amara," she said. I didn't speak, just stared. "You brought the ledger?" I nodded, held it out. She didn't take it. "I didn't bring you here to beg," she said, "or to threaten. I brought you here because I wanted you to understand what I was trying to build." I laughed bitterly. "You built it on broken backs." "No," she said, "I built it to survive." She walked slowly, her steps echoing. "I was the first in my family to own property, the first to break through the boys' clubs. Do you know what that took in 1982? I know what it took in 2022, I said, and I didn't trample anyone to do it." She looked away. "I was desperate," she said. "Desperation makes you ruthless. But no one handed me power. I carved it from stone. And I never expected my daughter to be the one holding the chisel that undid me." Silence. Then I said, softly, "I didn't want to destroy you. I wanted you to see me." She finally looked up. And for a flicker, just a flicker, I saw her eyes wet. But they hardened again. "Keep the ledger," she said. "Do what you must." Then she turned and walked away. I never saw her again. Back in Boston, I stood beneath the mural again. The colors shimmered in the morning light. We'd just secured funding to launch in our 10th city. The ledger was stored in a secure archive now, not hidden, but no longer in need of exposure. It had done its work, and I had done mine. I wasn't just Celeste Kensington's daughter. I was Amara, a builder, a breaker, a name entirely my own. The summer stretched on, long and bright, as if the universe itself were trying to heal the fractures Celeste had left behind. Boston's sidewalks bloomed with outdoor cafes and the echoes of live jazz from corner stoops. Lumina's headquarters were buzzing nearly 20 hours a day, hiring new staff, onboarding partners, launching pilot programs in 2 new cities. But I was restless. Not because I doubted what we'd built, but because part of me still believed the storm wasn't fully over. Whispers had started circulating. Anonymous emails, untraceable calls, hints in editorials. Celeste wasn't in Switzerland. She was still in the US, and she was watching. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to worry my team. But then Jonas called me into his office with a furrowed brow and a manila envelope. "You need to see this," he said. Inside were leaked internal memos targeting Lumina. Not legally, not publicly, but covertly. Funders were being approached by shell organizations offering, quote, parallel initiatives with eerily similar branding. Stories were being planted on fringe news sites about financial inconsistencies at Lumina, even though we passed every audit. It wasn't random. It was coordinated. Someone was trying to choke us, starve us, discredit us. And I knew exactly who. Celeste hadn't vanished. She was rebuilding. We traced the digital breadcrumbs. A consulting firm based out of Miami, a media holding group in Nevada, 3 new nonprofits claiming to serve at-risk women entrepreneurs, all funded by the same silent investor. The LLC trail led to a corporate trust in Delaware, but Jonas had seen enough of these games to pierce the veil. All signs pointed to a private trust connected to Solara Holdings, Celeste's old shell company. She was using it again, or someone else was using it on her behalf. Either way, it meant one thing: she wasn't done with me. I called a meeting with my leadership team. We sat around the oval table in the repurposed drawing room, sun filtering through tall windows. No boardroom drama, just truth. I won't lie to you, I said. This is coordinated. Someone's trying to discredit us quietly. They're hoping we'll bleed slowly and die off quietly. I paused. But we didn't come this far to be quiet. I laid out the full trail, the fake orgs, the ghost donors, the smear tactics. I saw the shock, the worry, but also the fire. We don't respond with lawsuits, I said. We respond with visibility. We called a press conference. But this time, we did something radical. We made our books public. Every expense, every grant, every payroll dollar, every audit. Transparency on steroids. Our press release read, "Lumina has nothing to hide. Can our critics say the same?" The response was electric. Suddenly, we weren't the target. We were the example. Other nonprofits began following suit. Major press outlets applauded the, quote, radical transparency movement. We were invited to panels, featured in international magazines, cited by Harvard case studies. And then came the tipping point. The IRS Whistleblower Office released a statement confirming that an ongoing investigation into Solara Holdings was active. Without naming names, it included clear references to misappropriated funds used to seed, quote, duplicate philanthropic ventures. Celeste was in the crosshairs again. But she didn't flinch. She emerged. Her first appearance came through an op-ed in a national business magazine. No photo. No interview. Just a full-page essay. It was titled "The Cost of Being First." She painted herself as a trailblazer burned by the very women she lifted, a victim of revisionist gratitude, a builder undone by her own daughter's ambition. It was venom wrapped in velvet. But she knew her audience. The piece went viral. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, rereading her closing words. Asterisk. Some legacies aren't inherited, they're stolen. The message was clear. She was coming for me. The next week, the mural at our Beacon Hill headquarters was vandalized. Paint bombs. Slurs. The local police dismissed it as random. I didn't. Our security systems flagged a suspicious vehicle, registered under a fake name but traced to a rental address in Manhattan. Jonas pulled the metadata on nearby footage. One of the individuals wore a bracelet, a limited edition Cartier release. Only 20 had been made that year. Celeste had worn one at the Kensington Gala. This wasn't just petty vandalism. It was a declaration. The team wanted to heighten security, relocate our headquarters. But I refused to be run out of my own home. Instead, we doubled down. We launched the Truth is Shelter campaign, offering support grants to nonprofits under attack from coordinated misinformation campaigns. Over 100 organizations signed up within days. And then came the game changer. A reporter from a major international news outlet reached out. She'd been following our story for months. And she had documents leaked from inside one of the Miami shell firms. Emails, invoices, strategy memos, all leading back to Celeste. But more than that, she had audio, recordings of internal strategy meetings. Celeste's voice, clear and commanding, outlining smear campaigns, listing my name, detailing plans to sink Lumina's funding and reclaim the narrative. The journalist offered us a preview. I listened in silence. Celeste's voice. She thinks she's righteous, but righteousness burns out, power lasts. We'll make her an example of why daughters should never forget who made them. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed. And then I said, let's publish. The exposé broke the internet. Headlines splashed across every outlet. Exclusive. Matriarch's war on her daughter's nonprofit, exposed. Nompton Tompling Kensington tapes reveal strategic sabotage campaign. Nompton Tompton Tompling Kens Ken. Tompling Kens campaign. Nompton Tompton Tompling Tom Tom. Streen Nompt Nampton Tomplings. Nampton Tomplings. Nampling Emplead Agashes, the final chapter of Subpoenaed Again. She was subpoenaed again. Congressional committees opened inquiries into nonprofit abuse and foundation laundering. Universities that once praised her quietly removed her from alumni boards. And I stood in the ruins she had created and built anew. We were offered new funding from global organizations. New alliances formed. Lumina became more than a name. It became a movement. And through it all, I never once heard from her again. Not even when the final ruling came down, a permanent ban from operating any charitable organization on U.S. soil. Not even when Hugo sent word that she had relocated to Singapore. Not even when my father called and whispered, "She's gone." 1 year later, I stood before a packed auditorium at the United Nations. Our model had been adopted in 12 countries. Our impact reports were being used to advise governments on equitable funding. We'd trained over 10,000 women in entrepreneurial leadership. I took the stage. "I was once told I wasn't worthy of the money I was born near," I said. "I was told to stay small, to follow, to behave." I paused. I didn't. And I won't, and neither should you. Applause roared. Later that night, as I returned to my Beacon Hill home, I paused by the mural. It had been restored, brighter than ever, stronger than ever. Like me. Like all of us. So Aescum Lasteresk. End of part 6. Let me know when you're ready for part 7. Asterisk. So Aescum Lask. The air was crisp with autumn when I received the call that would test everything I'd built. I was at the new Lumina campus in Chicago, our largest yet. It had taken months of planning, dozens of community partnerships, and a miracle of logistics to transform a dormant school building into a thriving hub for education, business incubation, and advocacy. On the second floor, past rooms echoing with multilingual pitch meetings and laptop keystrokes, we had painted a mural inspired by the Boston one. Women rising. Not waiting. I had just stepped into my office, tired but satisfied, when my phone buzzed. It was Jonas. His voice was tight. "You need to come back to Boston, now." Back in Beacon Hill, the mood was different. The mural glowed in the amber of street lamps as I stepped through the garden entrance. Jonas was waiting in my study, surrounded by folders, newspaper clippings, and a USB drive blinking from my laptop. He didn't speak, just played the video. It was grainy security footage, dated 3 nights ago. It showed a figure, slender, in dark clothing, slipping through the side entrance of our Boston HQ. No damage, no forced entry, just access. The footage cut to another camera angle. The figure entered the secure archives, where we kept the ledger. My blood went cold. "How?" I asked, barely able to find my voice. "We don't know," Jonas said. "But we confirmed it this morning. The ledger is gone." Panic didn't hit all at once. It unfurled slowly, like a cold tide. The ledger had been the keystone, the backbone of every exposé, every legal action, every redirection of public trust. Yes, we had scanned copies. Yes, we had backups in secured vaults. But the original? It had legal power, symbolic weight, evidence of chain of custody. Without it, any defense Celeste had to mount that we'd fabricated things would gain traction. I sat down, hard, on the edge of the desk. "She's baiting us," Jonas said, trying to destabilize our credibility. "This isn't about evidence. This is about narrative." "Then we shift the narrative again," I said, "but we don't flinch." The next few days were a blur. I held emergency calls with the heads of our legal team, our PR advisors, our community directors. We decided unanimously not to acknowledge the theft publicly. Instead, we released a celebratory report of LUMINA's global reach. Times 1 year since reckoning, 1.2 million women reached. But in the background, our cybersecurity team scoured every digital corner for the ledger. If it was used, leaked, or doctored, we would know. And then it happened. A new website appeared, truthredux.org. Simple, plain, stark white with black serif text. A message. Twavely Illumina lied. The ledger is fake. Here is the truth. They posted 3 scanned pages from the ledger, doctored. The numbers were subtly changed, the names distorted, the paper aged differently. But to the average viewer, it looked damning. The site spread like wildfire across niche forums, conspiracy blogs, and even mainstream social media. Hashtags like #Luminagate and #Legacilise began to trend. Our inbox flooded. Threats, questions, doubts. Jonas and I convened again. "She's not just trying to discredit us," he said. "She's trying to erase us." That night, I stood in the mural garden under a half-moon. I looked up at the painted faces. Fierce, vulnerable, climbing. Was this how she always felt? That power could only be maintained through control? No. I was not her. I would not erase. I would reveal. So I called a press conference. Not a defensive one. A defiant one. "I'm not here to silence anyone," I said, standing before a wall of reporters, community leaders, and young women holding our Lumina guides. "I'm here to expand truth." We projected both versions of the ledger. Side by side, page by page. I walked them through the differences. And then I presented our forensic authentication reports, time-stamped, notarized, and backed by 3 independent data science labs. We streamed it live. Every click of the projector, every close-up, every signature matched. And when I finished, I looked directly into the camera. Lumina was never about one book. It's about what we build when we're told we don't belong, and we're not going anywhere. Support poured in. Our donation numbers tripled that week, but more importantly, dozens of former Celeste affiliates publicly defected. They posted their own testimonials, ex-staffers, silent partners, people who had been too afraid to speak. One by one, they told the truth. Truthredux.org was quietly taken down 3 days later. We traced the registration to a proxy firm in Zurich. And the bracelet footage? Confirmed. It was her. Celeste had returned to Boston under a false name. She had walked the halls of the house she lost. She had stared down the movement I built. And in her desperation, she'd tried to steal back the truth. But the truth had already been shared, carried, rooted. Too big to be erased. In the weeks that followed, I found myself slowing down. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I wasn't moving in response to her. I was moving for me. Lumina had reached sustainability. I appointed a new executive director, a woman from our first Boston cohort, brilliant, steady, fierce. I stepped back. Not away. Just back. To breathe. To be. To write. I began drafting a book, not about Celeste, not about revenge, but about power. How women inherit it. Shape it. Survive it. One afternoon, months later, I returned to Vermont. My father and I sat under the same tree we had years ago. The valley stretched below us, lit golden with late-day sun. "She came back," I said quietly. He didn't ask who. "I know," he said. "I could feel it." He paused. "And?" "She tried to erase me," I said, "but I was already everywhere." He nodded. "You outgrew her shadow." "I outgrew needing it," I said. We sat there as the wind moved through the trees. Later that year, I stood on the balcony of a community center in Lagos, Nigeria, our newest Lumina branch. Below me, women gathered in circles, reading, writing, teaching each other how to negotiate contracts, budget funding, and demand respect. One of them looked up. Her name was Fadila, 19, starting a garment business with 3 other girls from her village. She waved. I waved back. And I knew, no matter how far she tried to reach from the shadows, Celeste couldn't undo this. This wasn't her legacy. It was mine. Names***. End of part 7. Let me know when you're ready for part 8. The rhythm of my life had changed. I no longer woke with dread buzzing beneath my skin. I didn't need to glance at the headlines before brushing my teeth. The pulse of survival had finally slowed into something steady, something sustainable. I was still in motion, but no longer in combat. After Lagos, we launched 2 new Lumina centers in Sao Paulo and Toronto. I watched from a deliberate distance as the women I had once mentored became leaders, and their protégés became mentors in turn. We had created something that replicated, not because of me, but because of the hunger it answered. But even in that piece, I never let my guard drop completely. Not because I feared Celeste's return, but because I knew legacy is never truly finished. One morning, I received a parcel. Plain, no return address, no note. Inside, a locket. I recognized it instantly. My grandmother's, passed to my mother, supposed to be passed to me. Celeste had worn it once on my high school graduation day, before vanishing before my name was called. I held it in my palm for a long time, the cool weight of it stirring something in my chest. There was no message, no indication of where she was, but the gesture was clear. Some part of her had finally let go. And that meant I could too. I returned to Beacon Hill that week. Though I traveled often, it remained my anchor. The HQ was still thriving, the mural tended weekly, the staff rotating through meetings and laughter and long nights of passion-driven work. I walked the halls in quiet reverence, letting my fingers trail the banister I'd once gripped in rage. The house was no longer a battlefield, it was a sanctuary. Adele met me in the atrium. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Who?" "She says her name is Iris. From Maine." She didn't want to call ahead. I nodded. Adele led her in. She was in her 60s, with wiry gray hair and a canvas satchel. Her hands were weathered, her eyes sharp. "I was one of Celeste's first project managers," she said without preamble, "back when she flipped her first hotel in Portland." She sat, reached into her bag, and pulled out a notebook. "I kept copies," she said. Inside were carbon slips, transaction records, personal notes. "You should know," she said, "Celeste didn't just manipulate cities. She manipulated entire state development boards. There are still men in office who owe her favors. And they're starting to whisper again." I felt my stomach turn. "Are they rebuilding something?" "Not yet," she said. "But they're trying to recover the land she lost, quietly, behind new corporate names. And it's spreading beyond Massachusetts." I gathered my team. We poured through the notebook Iris left. Names, dates, deal descriptions, all wrapped in bureaucratic language but unmistakably pointing to one thing. Celeste's influence hadn't just vanished, it had metastasized, broken into fragments, spread through allies still operating in the dark. What she'd lost in personal power, her legacy still held in backrooms and signatures. We mapped it out, a web of influence stretching from Portland to Philadelphia to Denver, the same cities Lumina had targeted for expansion. Coincidence? Not likely. I flew to Philadelphia next. We had planned a satellite launch there for winter, but I moved it up. I met with local organizers, women who had been trying to buy back blighted blocks, only to be blocked at zoning meetings by sudden, unexplained policy shifts. I knew that playbook. And behind those blocks? A developer called Adara Capital. Jonas dug in. Adara was owned by an overseas holding group. And one of the early funders? A silent partner listed only as CKI Trust. Celeste Kensington International. I didn't know whether to laugh or curse. She was gone, but her shell company still moved like chess pieces across the board. This time, we wouldn't go public with fury. This time, we would outbuild her. I called every Lumina director to Boston. Over 2 days, we held a closed-door summit. Not just a meeting, a recalibration, a redesign. We called it the Lighthouse Model. Instead of expanding one center at a time, we would establish anchor hubs in vulnerable cities and spin off mobile units, legal aid pop-ups, and advocacy corridors within 6 months. Speed, precision, permanence. Philadelphia would be the first lighthouse. Then Portland. Then Denver. We didn't announce it on social media. We didn't issue a press release. We just got to work. And within 4 months, the zoning policies in Philadelphia began to shift. Adira Capital lost a key vote. Our legal team found a buried provision in a 2009 bill that prevented non-transparent trusts from acquiring redevelopment land. We filed a motion. And won. It wasn't glamorous. There were no headlines. But slowly, block by block, Lumina began reclaiming the space Celeste's ghost was trying to haunt. And in that work, something beautiful bloomed. Other organizations, grassroots, led by women of color, immigrant-led co-ops, indigenous housing networks, began banding with us. Not under us, Klamstanks with us. It was no longer just my movement. It was ours. I stepped further back and watched a younger leader, Sana, a former student of mine, take the Philadelphia Lighthouse opening stage, her voice steady, her story raw. I was told people like me don't own buildings, she said. Now I help others buy them. She didn't mention Celeste. She didn't have to. Her very existence was defiance. By the following spring, I had one more journey to make. I returned to Vermont, this time alone. No media, no press, no team. My father had passed 3 months earlier. Cancer, sudden, unforgiving. He had written me a letter before he left. You taught me what it means to stay soft while being powerful. That's rarer than anyone admits. Don't harden. Even when the world begs you to. I sat at his easel, unfinished canvas before me, and wept. Back in Boston, I entered the Beacon Hill house alone. I made tea, walked through every room, ended in the archive. The empty shelf where the original ledger once sat had been replaced. Now it held hundreds of bound volumes. Impact reports, letters, stories, grants fulfilled, properties returned, names remembered. Not the legacy of one woman. The legacy of many. I placed the locket Celeste had sent on the shelf. Not as a tribute. As a closing chapter. Weeks later, I received a letter, handwritten, elegant, sealed in wax. It was from Celeste. No return address, no phone number, just a single page. You were never meant to be what I couldn't control, but you became what I could never be. That may be the only pride I'll take with me. Don't follow my path. Make yours wider. She signed it, Mother. That night I lit a candle in the window. Not for her. For every woman who had ever had to fight twice as hard just to be believed. For every daughter who refused to become her mother's silence. For every legacy rebuilt from ash. And I slept soundly. For the first time in years. Times asterisk end of part 8. Let me know when you're ready for part 9. Asterisk. Base. I remember the day I realized the house no longer belonged to my mother in any way. Not in title, not in scent, not in memory. It was a Tuesday. Rain spattered the iron railings, and inside, laughter rolled from the kitchen where 2 interns were burning cinnamon rolls in the staff oven. I should have been annoyed, but instead I leaned in the doorway and smiled. This was home now. Not hers. Mine. Ours. And yet, as the world spun on, a strange question began to take root inside me, a question that startled me with its shape. What now? I had built the machine, it ran, it pulsed, it spread. And I had done what I swore I would do. I had met my mother's fire with light of my own. But what was left of me, separate from that fight? In March, Sana invited me to speak at the Philadelphia Lighthouse's first Grant Gala. It would be intimate, just a few dozen founders, some city leaders, and a new cohort of young entrepreneurs. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I feared what stepping back in as a symbol would mean. I wasn't the movement. But the movement had been born from my shadow. Still, I accepted. I stood on stage that night, under warm string lights, holding a glass of ginger punch, and said this: "Legacy isn't what we leave behind when we die. It's what we live in others while we're still here. Then I stepped down, and that was enough. 1 week later, I got the call from Hugo. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 8 months, not since Celeste's final letter. His voice was raw, hesitant. "She's dying," he said. My breath hitched. "She's in Singapore," he continued. "Pancreatic. Stage 4. She has maybe a few weeks. She asked for you." I didn't answer. "She doesn't want forgiveness," he added. "She just wants to say something. One thing." I hung up. For the next 48 hours, I did everything except think about it. I worked, I cooked, I walked. I visited our new Lumina library in Mattapan and read poetry out loud to a group of women launching a print co-op. But still, I saw her, in glass reflections, in marble corners, in my own hands when they moved just so. I booked a flight to Singapore. The hospital was sterile and beautiful. Private. Overlooking the harbor. Celeste looked smaller than I remembered. Her cheekbones jutted sharply. Her once iconic silver hair now barely clung to her scalp. She didn't speak when I entered. Just looked. And I looked back. We sat in silence for nearly 5 minutes before she finally whispered, "You still hold your chin like your father." I nodded. She reached to the bedside and pulled out a notebook. Leather-bound, black. "I started writing a few years ago," she said, "after you exposed me." I raised an eyebrow. "Not memoir," she said, "not spin, just thoughts." She handed it to me. "Some are dreams, some are regrets, some are lies I told so often, I forgot they weren't true." I took the notebook. "I won't ask for anything," she said, "not your pity, not your forgiveness." Then she looked away. "But I'm proud of what you did, even if it destroyed me." I left without crying. On the flight back, I didn't read the notebook. Not yet. I tucked it in my carry-on and stared out the window, watching clouds like bone-white memories drift beneath me. When I landed in Boston, I stepped into the house and felt its warmth wrap around me. I went upstairs, made tea, and finally opened her words. The first page read, "To the daughter I couldn't shape, but who shaped the world." If I had known what I was building when I tried to build you, I might have been gentler, but I only knew how to survive. And sometimes surviving turns your hands into knives. You never flinched, you never begged, you never disappeared. You became a lighthouse, which means I was always the storm. I closed the notebook and cried for her, for me, for the little girl I had once been, holding a lemonade pitcher in that very kitchen and hoping her mother would say she was proud. And now she had. In her way. A week later, Celeste died. She left no will. No funeral. Just a small private cremation arranged by Hugo and a final envelope delivered to me via courier. Inside, the deed to her last property. A plot of coastal land in Maine. Nothing developed, just rocks, pine, and sea. It had been in her name for decades. I visited it that weekend. Waves crashed against ancient stones. Wind pulled at my coat. Gulls wheeled above. There was nothing there, which meant anything could be. I walked the land, felt its pulse, and made a decision. We called it the Horizon Project. Lumina's first retreat center. Not a headquarters, not a lighthouse, just space. To think, to rest, to recover. We broke ground quietly, no press. Just volunteers, apprentices, and 3 local elders who knew the land better than any of us. It took 9 months. The architecture curved with the cliffs, windows faced east. Every structure was built sustainably. Rainwater fed the garden. Wild grass grew on the roofs. When we opened, we invited women from our oldest and youngest cohorts. No meetings, no pitches, just silence, food, music, stars. On the first night, we stood around a fire pit, and I read aloud from Celeste's notebook. "I once built towers to keep others small. My daughter built bridges, I hope they stretch further than either of us can see. We burned the page after. And danced. The years rolled forward. Lumina entered over 20 countries. I became a footnote in its story, and that was how it should be. But every now and then someone would ask, "Was it true that your mother left you nothing?" And I would smile. "No," I'd say. "She left me everything I never wanted." And from that, I built something no one could take. On the 10th anniversary of the Beacon Hill buyout, we hosted a memorial event. Not for her. For us. For those who rose despite legacy, despite inheritance, despite being told you're not worthy. I gave a single speech. It was short. I was told my value was conditional, I said. Now I teach women to name their worth before anyone else can price them. In the end, I did visit her grave. A private one. Unmarked. Hugo gave me the coordinates. I brought nothing, just silence. I stood there, let the wind speak, and whispered, "I forgive you, but I'll never forget." Back at the Maine coast, the sun dipped low. I watched a new cohort arrive. Young women in boots and braids and tattoos and softness. They didn't know Celeste. They didn't need to. They knew the land. They knew the work. They knew themselves. And that was enough. Because this story had never been about a mother's wealth. It was about a daughter's becoming. And I had become. Fully. Finally. Free. Times asterisk. End of part 9. Let me know when you're ready for part 10. Asterisk. The 10th anniversary of the Beacon Hill takeover was supposed to be a quiet milestone, but I should have known better. It started with an envelope, no return address. Cream-colored, heavy stock. Inside, a legal summons. My heart skipped. It wasn't a lawsuit against me, it was a subpoena. I was being asked to testify in a federal case against a real estate investment firm in D.C., one with buried ties to Celeste's oldest offshore shell company. I stared at the name on the paperwork, Ardentum Group. I knew the name well. Celeste had once called them her skeleton vault. And now, someone had pried it open. Jonas and I met with federal investigators in a private office in Washington. They laid out the scope. Millions laundered through defunct trusts, real estate fraud, foreign donors, campaign finance violations. And Celeste had been one of the architects. She was dead. But her blueprint lived on. "We believe you can verify patterns," the lead attorney said. "Your work documenting Solara Holdings provided the original seed." For the next several weeks I combed through documents, testified under oath, and watched as pieces of my mother's long-ago empire crumbled in legal filings and bank seizures. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. Like brushing the last dust from a shelf you'll never use again. Back in Boston, I received an invitation. From Harvard. They wanted to name a new social impact building after me. I said no. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I didn't want my name in stone. I wanted my work in people. Instead, I asked them to name the building after 5 women from our earliest Lumina cohorts, the ones who built brick by brick beside me. They agreed. On opening day, the plaque read, Noor, the Marisol, Alira Aisha, June Nadia Commons. Underneath, in honor of those who rise, build, and carry others with them. With Lumina now fully international, I shifted my focus. Not to expansion. To archiving. I launched a project called Heritage, a digital repository of women's stories, victories, and losses across generations. A living timeline. We collected audio recordings, love letters, eviction notices turned purchase deeds, photos of childhood bedrooms turned home offices. Heritage went viral. Suddenly, everyone wanted to tell their mother's story. Or their grandmother's. Or their own. And this time, not as tragedy, but as testament. Sometime around late fall, I took a sabbatical. I didn't announce it. I just stopped. I turned off notifications, left my title in the capable hands of my successor, packed a single suitcase, and disappeared to the Scottish Highlands. A small cottage, a fog-covered lake, no cell service. Just me. And silence. And slowly, for the first time in years, I began to write. Not speeches, not manifestos, just a story. My story. It poured out of me like thawed water. I wrote about the girl who stood in a kitchen while her mother told her she wasn't worthy. I wrote about the quiet rage that planted itself in her chest and grew into a tree of steel. I wrote about revenge and how it turns sweet if you let it ripen into purpose. I wrote about inheritance, not of money, but of wounds, and how breaking that cycle is the most violent love there is. By spring, I returned home. Beacon Hill welcomed me with soft light and open doors. Sana greeted me with a binder of updates, grants awarded, chapters opened, new leaders elevated. I sat at the kitchen table and realized I didn't need to lead anymore. I had led enough. Now it was time to mentor, to archive, to bear witness. One evening, I hosted a small dinner. 10 women, some I had known for years, some I had never met. We shared food, wine, stories, and at the end of the night, I passed around a small notebook. Write one thing you thought you'd never say out loud, I told them. We passed it around, no names, just truths. When it came back to me, I didn't read them. I just placed it on the mantle. A new kind of ledger. Not of debts, but of releases. Months later, a student journalist asked me if I had ever considered returning to corporate real estate. I laughed. I was never in real estate, I said. I was in reclamation. Of property? She asked. No, I said, of identity. I turned 45 that summer. My staff baked me a cake. The frosting was awful, the song was off-key. It was perfect. Someone asked if I ever thought of having children. I said, I have thousands. On a quiet night, I walked through the old archive. The locket still sat on the shelf. Next to it, I placed my own, one I'd worn at dozens of speaking events over the years. Inside, a photo of me and my father on his last birthday. And on the back, a quote he'd once written to me. Asterisk. The bravest thing you ever did was not break where you came from. 10 years ago, I stood in a kitchen while a woman who had given me life told me I wasn't worthy. Today, I stand in kitchens where young women plot empires. I sit in boardrooms where grants are awarded without begging. I walk through neighborhoods where names like mine are no longer whispered, but spoken with pride. And when someone asks how it started, I say, with a mortgage. And a mother who bet against me, and a daughter who bet back. Sometimes I still dream of her. Not the powerful version, the young one. Before the armor, before the cruelty. The girl who just wanted to be seen. I hope, somewhere, she knows that I saw her, even when she forgot how to look. Because in the end, this story was never about winning. It was about remembering. That worth is not inherited. It's owned, claimed, lived, and finally, shared. It was the first snow of the season when I received the call. I was seated in the upstairs reading Nook at Beacon Hill, bundled in a wool shawl, sipping tea and rereading a memoir I'd dog-eared a decade ago. Outside, flurries blanketed the iron fence in silence. The call was from an unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. A woman's voice, crisp and unfamiliar, introduced herself as an executive producer for a major streaming network. We want to tell your story, she said. The real one. I'd received requests before, dozens. Books, films, podcasts, all wanting the drama, the spectacle. This one was different. They didn't want to dramatize the feud. They wanted to chronicle the rebuilding. I asked for time. I walked through the house that day, touching the banisters, listening to laughter in the kitchen from our program associates, feeling the subtle hum of a space that had once been filled with tension now brimming with grace. Later that night, I called back. "If we do this," I said, "it's not a redemption arc, it's a reconstruction." They agreed. The process took nearly a year. I wasn't the only voice. They interviewed Jonas, Sana, Adele, dozens of women from our earliest cohorts, even former journalists who'd once covered the story with biting skepticism. And slowly the narrative took shape, not just of a daughter defying her mother, but of an entire generation undoing the silence handed to them. The documentary was titled The Ledger, not for what was lost, but for what was recorded, reckoned with, and rewritten. When it premiered in a private screening at the Maine Coast Retreat Center, I almost didn't attend. But Sana called. "You have to see what you started," she said. So I went. We sat under soft lanterns, a screen pulled across a wall of pine. As the film played, I watched my younger self on archival footage, shaking hands, giving speeches, sitting in tense courtrooms, weeping in gardens. I watched Celeste's face flash on screen, her voice, her power. And I didn't flinch. When the credits rolled, no one clapped. They just stood in quiet reverence. Then, one by one, they came to me, not to ask questions, but to say thank you. The public release followed. It aired globally. The response was overwhelming. Viewers flooded Lumina's site. Donations surged. Applications doubled. But more than that, letters poured in. From women. From daughters. From estranged mothers. All saying, "I see myself here. I want to begin again." We launched a new initiative that month, Rescript. A 6-month restorative leadership journey for women rebuilding from toxic family systems, career trauma, or public shaming. It filled in days. Somewhere in the momentum, I received a package. No note. Just a velvet box. Inside, a photograph. Black and white. A teenage Celeste. Smiling, unguarded, standing barefoot on a rooftop with paint on her hands. I stared at it for a long time. And then I placed it in our Beacon Hill archive. Not out of sentiment. Out of accuracy. She was a chapter. But never the whole story. The next major shift came unexpectedly. I was invited to testify before a global economic panel. They were examining the intersection of gender inheritance and intergenerational equity. I sat beside ministers, billionaires, and policy architects. And when it was my turn, I said, "Money is not the most dangerous inheritance. Shame is." I let it hang. And then, "We've spent centuries teaching daughters to inherit silence. We need to start funding their volume." It made headlines. But more importantly, it seeded policies. Pilot programs for universal maternal income. Legal templates for community-owned housing collectives. Educational reforms in 8 countries. Somewhere in the avalanche of progress, I met someone. Not a partner. Not a romantic conquest. Just a man who wasn't afraid of my shadows. His name was Elias. He taught carpentry to refugees in Marseille. He didn't Google me when we met. He made me laugh. We spent time together, quietly, freely. He never asked about my mother. Just held my hand when I stared too long at old ledgers. At 50, I published my first book. Not the documentary companion. Not a leadership manual. A memoir. Called Built from Refusal. It opened with a single sentence. My mother told me I was unworthy. And in her voice I found my blueprint. Book tours followed. But I limited them. I preferred the intimacy of letters. Readers sent poems, sketches, dreams. I kept them in an old cigar box. Called it the Promise Vault. Every winter, I returned to the coast. The retreat center remained untouched. Still quiet, still sacred. Some years I hosted gatherings. Other years, I simply sat and listened. To waves. To wind. to the life I had made beyond proving anything to anyone. On the 15th anniversary of the buyout, we hosted an intergenerational forum. Grandmothers and daughters, founders and funders. We asked one question: what legacy did you escape to find the one you made? The answers filled 1,000 pages. We printed them into a book. Not for sale, just for remembering. As for Beacon Hill, it changed. We turned it into a museum and workspace hybrid. Free tours, rotating exhibitions on women's economic history, temporary residencies for underrepresented writers. My office became a poetry library. I moved to a small apartment above a florist in Cambridge. It smelled like jasmine and newspaper ink. I loved it. Celeste remains a name in footnotes now. Students write theses about her rise, her fall, her legacy. But I don't answer their emails. I have nothing left to say about her that the world hasn't already decided. And I'm okay with that. Because I know who she was. And I know who I became. Dig. Sometimes I sit in the sculpture garden at LUMINA's global headquarters. It's in Nairobi now. Not by accident. One of our earliest interns built it brick by brick. There's a sculpture there, a woman with her arms open, torso made of ledgers, ribs of vines, eyes of copper. At the base it says, "She held what broke her, and it bloomed. I touch it every time. Not for luck, but for closure." Because this story ends, not with me, but with the thousands who came after. Who stood where I once did, in kitchens, in courtrooms, in broken homes, and whispered, "I am not what you said I'd be," and then became more. So much more. Times asterisk. End of part 11. Let me know when you're ready for part 12, the final part. Asterisk. The morning of the 20th anniversary arrived without ceremony. No press, no parades, just soft sun over Beacon Hill, dappling cobblestones like glittering lace. I walked past the old Kensington House, now draped in ivy and humming with the quiet purpose of LUMINA's Boston hub, and paused by the iron gate. A young woman opened the door, balancing a box of books against her chest. She didn't recognize me, and that was perfect. I helped her with the latch, smiled, and continued on. I now lived full-time in Maine. The coastal retreat, the Horizon Project, had expanded, not in size, but in soul. Women came year-round, not just to rest, but to redirect. We hosted birth doulas, climate scientists, survivors, sculptors. No hierarchy, just presence. Each left something behind, a line in our journal, a stone on the ledge, a name carved in the wooden beam above the north-facing window. We called that beam the Becoming Line. I'd thought long and hard about how to close this chapter. How to say goodbye not to the fight, but to the version of me that had carried it for so long. It wasn't grief. It was release. And one night I wrote a letter to myself. To the woman who once begged to be seen. You made a world. You didn't just inherit legacy. You rewrote it. You mothered thousands. You lived without asking permission. And now you may rest. Love. The one you became. I buried the letter beneath the cairn behind the retreat's East Trail. A tradition we started the year after Celeste died. Every woman who visited placed one thing there. A note, a key, a name, a breath. It wasn't about closure. It was about honoring the burden and putting it down. Sana visited that spring with her daughter. Her name was Amara. I held her, warm and wriggling, 6 months old, and for a moment I thought of the long chain of women whose names had never been remembered. My grandmother, my mother, me, and now her. A new name, a new page. Lumina's 50th city chapter opened in Jakarta. I sent a video message, brief and simple. The strongest thing you can do with pain is build something others can stand on. Then I stepped out of the spotlight again. The new leaders carried it well, better than I ever could alone. In the final months of the 20th year, I received one last invitation from the United Nations. They were hosting a summit on ethical wealth, intergenerational repair, narrative ownership. They wanted me to give the closing keynote. I hesitated. I was tired, but not from fatigue, from completion. But I said yes, not because I needed the world to hear me, but because I needed to say it. One last time. The hall was filled with leaders, survivors, skeptics, believers. I walked slowly to the podium. No notes. Just breath. Just truth. And I began. 20 years ago, my mother told me I wasn't worthy of her money. So I bought her house. Then her silence. Then the truth. Not to punish her, but to remind myself that no one gets to decide your value but you. In the years that followed, I watched daughters become architects. I watched shame become fertilizer. I watched empires fall and movements rise. And what I learned, more than anything else, is this: legacy is not what you leave when you die. It's what you release when you finally live. I looked up and smiled. I am not my mother's daughter. I am my own. The standing ovation blurred in my ears. I walked off stage and disappeared into the wings. Elias was waiting. He kissed my hand. "You done?" he asked. "Almost." We returned to Maine. Winter came early that year. The sea roared louder, like it too was remembering something it once held. I spent my days reading, writing letters, cooking slow meals. And sometimes, when no one was watching, I danced barefoot in the snow. Not to prove I was alive, but because I finally knew I was. When I died, years later, it was in my sleep. No drama. No headline. Just moonlight. And peace. My will was short. My only request, that no statue be built. Just plant trees. Let the branches remember me. And they did. Now you hold this story. Maybe you are a daughter. Maybe a mother. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But if you've ever been told you are not worthy, let this be your rebellion. You are. You always were. And if the ones who birthed you could not see it, then build a life that does. You don't need to buy a house. Or raise the rent. Just raise your voice. Raise your name. Raise your worth. Raise a future. Because worth is not what you inherit. It's what you declare. And now, it's yours. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.